Hello, welcome to Train Signal. This is the Discovering Discovery lesson in the System Center 2012 Configuration Manager training course. We'll kick this lesson off by discovering what's new in System Center Configuration Manager 2012 Discovery, followed by some facts that everyone should know about the discovery process in Configuration Manager, as well as an overview of how discovery actually operates. From there, we'll discuss the specific discovery methods that are available in Configuration Manager and what each one does. By the end of this lesson, you will have learned how to discover various resources on your network that can be managed with Configuration Manager. You'll also learn the different methods by which discovery operates so that you can understand which discovery methods you should use to find which kind of objects in your environment. From a business goals perspective, the discovery process really begins to bring together all of the various IT resources that you can manage with Configuration Manager into a cohesive, well-managed pool. This is the beginning of that process. The process starts by finding everything that's out there, bring it into a whole, and then starting to manage it. This also prepares you to begin to deploy the Configuration Manager client, which is going to be another key building block in this course. The entire purpose of discovery can be wrapped up in one simple statement. Discovery locates objects in your environment that can be brought into the Configuration Manager database and managed or otherwise used by Configuration Manager to improve IT operations. Through the discovery process, you will find those objects in your environment, workstations, servers, that can be managed and used to great effect within Configuration Manager. After all, the whole point of Configuration Manager is to streamline the management of the environment. Therefore, bringing the objects into the Configuration Manager database makes sense as a first step. There's some new stuff, though, that you can find in Configuration Manager 2012. First of all, what used to be called Active Directory Security Group Discovery is now Active Directory Group Discovery. Active Directory Group Discovery will also discover group memberships of resources. So if you've got a group of users, you can actually find the members of those groups using this discovery method. Active Directory System Group Discovery is gone. It is no longer available in Configuration Manager 2012. Further, two discovery methods, Active Directory System Discovery and Active Directory Group Discovery, will support stale records, which we'll discover later on in this course. Delta Discovery has been significantly improved and is supported by Active Directory System, User, and Group Discovery. Delta Discovery is a wonderful tool that can detect when computers or users are added to or removed from a group. Now, this is not just for groups. It can find new resources out in the network as well. What are some facts that you should keep in mind about discovery? First of all, as mentioned, discovery will locate objects that can be brought into the Configuration Manager database, such as client computers, user account objects, user groups, and other items. This is a critical process that enables client software deployment to take place. Without Configuration Manager understanding that there's a particular resource out there that can be managed, you'd be hard-pressed to figure out how to get a client onto that particular device. Configuration Manager has to know that if something exists before it can manage it. You should also understand that by default, most discovery options are actually disabled out of the box, save one. The only discovery method that's enabled by default is called Heartbeat Discovery, and you'll understand why that's enabled by default by the end of this lesson. You should also understand that you don't always have to run every single discovery method. You have to pick and choose which discovery methods make the most sense for your particular circumstances. In fact, discovery should be handled carefully. If you don't need particular objects, don't enable that discovery method. If you don't need, for example, systems, which you probably do, but just for argument's sake, don't find systems. All it'll do is junk up your database with a whole bunch of stuff that you don't need. So only use discovery for what you actually need. And you should understand that discovery can be noisy depending on the discovery method in use. And you'll understand that there's a particularly noisy method called network discovery that really puts a lot of stuff out on the network, but it finds a lot of objects as well. And by noisy, it just means it generates a lot of network traffic. Configuration Manager 2012 fully supports Delta Discovery. This prevents the need for regular, full discoveries, which can be resource intensive. This discovers objects that have been added since the previous discovery was run. So let's say you've added computers to the network. Well, Delta Discovery can find those computers out on the network. So, how does discovery work? First of all, the administrator will enable a particular discovery method. That's you. You are the administrator. So you will enable a particular discovery method. As objects that are supported by that discovery method are found, an item called a data discovery record is going to be created. And this contains information pertinent to the discovery method being used. So if you're finding computers, it'll have the computer name and some other vital details about that particular resource. A record is then created in the Configuration Manager database just for this discovered object. So each discovered object is then added to the Configuration Manager database for your future use. Once in the database, objects can be targeted for particular activities. For example, computer objects can be targeted for Configuration Manager client push installation, which means that you can push the Configuration Manager client out to a discovered device. Software can be deployed to systems in a specific organizational unit as long as the OU has been discovered. So, you're able to find and use resources in different ways depending on what kind of resource it is. Now let's talk about some specific discovery methods, and then we're going to start working with some of these in the Configuration Manager system for Global Mantics. Active Directory System Discovery, as its name implies, will find computer objects that exist in Active Directory. Basically, Configuration Manager will scan Active Directory for new resources that meet the discovery protocol for system discovery. It'll also discover a number of system attributes, including the name of the computer, the operating system, the Active Directory container name in which the system exists, the IP address of the system, the Active Directory site, and the last time the system was logged on to. Now, notice it finds a lot of information. Well, you can use this information. Suppose you want to then target a software deployment to just the Windows XP systems in your environment. Well, you're capturing the operating system and version as a part of this discovery process. Therefore, that information will exist in your Configuration Manager database. And that means you can use it in queries, and you can use it in collections, and you can use it as a part of your administrative processes. If you have trouble with this discovery process, there's a log file just for this use. I'll show you where this log file exists later on. We are going to review the Active Directory System Discovery settings, but before we do that, we're going to move on and take a look at the settings that we have in place for the forest as a whole. And then we're going to move on to Active Directory System Discovery. Next up, we have Active Directory Forest Discovery, which is going to discover the forest, the domains, the Active Directory sites, and IP subnets that may exist in your environment. This is the one discovery method that can be run from a central administration site. So if you are running a particularly large Configuration Manager system or one that requires multiple sites, you can actually run the forest discovery method from your central admin site. No other discovery can run from central, however, so keep that in mind. This discovery method can also return trust information between Active Directory domains. And it can initiate the automatic creation of boundaries or boundary groups. So, you could say, I want to create boundaries for all of the domains that are found in my environment. Well, you can do that with this particular discovery method, and we will do that with this discovery method soon. Again, there are log files associated with this discovery method. I'm not going to read them to you because they're on the screen, but I will show you where they are in just a few minutes. And we want to see the Active Directory Forest discovery settings in action. Now, we're going to go over to the Configuration Manager console for Global Mantics and take a look at both system and forest discovery as a group. And here we are at the Global Mantics Configuration Manager console. And here's the basic opening screen we always see when we first start the console. Discovery is handled in the administration area, and it's a hierarchy configuration item these days. You can see we have a number of discovery methods here with only one of them being enabled. Now, we reviewed these before, but let's take a look at these other settings really quick. Boundaries, boundary groups, and Active Directory forests. Right now, we do see a forest, which is a good thing, but that's because we're doing the Active Directory integration that we should be doing, so we should see the forest piece having been created. The first thing we want to do in my opinion, is to do a forest discovery. So we'll right-click Forest and choose Properties. We're going to enable Active Directory Forest Discovery, and we'll automatically create Active Directory site boundaries as they're discovered. Now, this is going to depend heavily on how you want to manage Configuration Manager in your environment. If you've got different ways you want to manage clients, you may not do this, or you may, but in general, you probably want to have at least a boundary for Active Directory. We're not going to worry too much about creating IP address range boundaries for subnets because really, for our purposes here, it's not that important. Again, in a larger organization, this might make sense. First, think about it this way. If you've got 50 different sites out there, you may want to create boundaries for all of your sites based on IP address ranges so to make it easier to manage bandwidth and things like that between the sites. And I'll click OK. And do I want to run a full discovery as soon as possible? Yeah, I would. And you can see now that we've got the Active Directory Forest Discovery is enabled. Now, there's really not a whole lot to managing this particular process. You basically enable the method, and it'll go out and start looking for different objects that it can find that meet the criteria for the discovery method. Probably the quickest way to tell if anything's working is to take a look at the boundaries. Because as you're going to see, a boundary was created very quickly. It found an Active Directory site, and as we told it to, it created a boundary for that Active Directory site. Remember, a boundary is basically a container for clients. For the purposes of our lab here, an Active Directory site is a perfectly suitable boundary. And you can look at the details of the boundary if you like. Description. Now, the reason it says default first site name, that's pretty much an Active Directory default. If you haven't changed your default first site name in Active Directory, you're going to see this. You'll see this on a lot of Configuration Manager environments. Are there any site systems? Not yet. And are there any boundary groups? Not yet. Well, we can start changing this later on, but we're not too concerned about that right now. Now, let's create a boundary group around this particular boundary. Boundary groups are groups of boundaries, so you can have multiple Active Directory sites, for example, be grouped up into one boundary group. Well, we only have one Active Directory site, but we still need to create a boundary group from it. To do that, I'll right-click the boundary, choose Add Selected Item to New Boundary Group. I'm going to call this GM-AD-BG. That's going to be the Global Mantics Active Directory Boundary Group. I'm going to add the default first site name to it. If you want to, you can filter, but I only have one thing to look at. And click OK. And if we go to boundary groups now, you're going to see that we have our first boundary group. Now, if I look at the properties for this boundary group, you're going to see references. This is a tab on which I can say, I want to use this boundary group for client assignment, for site assignment. And what this means is that clients will get assigned to this boundary group, and that's what we ultimately want to have happen. Once clients are assigned to this boundary group, we need to make sure that they know where they can find content. This is another critical piece of the puzzle. So I'm actually going to select the checkbox that says use this boundary group for client assignment. Now, there's not going to be much here. The assigned site that they're going to assign to is GM1. That's the only site we have. And I'm going to add our site server as the site system server for clients in this boundary group. This is the content location where clients will find content that they need. And click OK. You'll now notice we have one member, one site system count. We're on our way to making all of this work. You may recall previously that we talked about the fact that we were going to do some discovery and boundary creation in the discovery lesson. That's what we just did. We basically did the rest of the preparation that's necessary in order to get the basic infrastructure prepared for Configuration Manager clients to be able to participate in the environment. So we've got our boundary group, we've got our boundaries, but right now we still don't have any clients to manage. We have forests, but we don't have any clients. So let's do a system discovery. Again, we'll right-click Active Directory System Discovery and choose Properties. Here, we want to enable Active Directory System Discovery. Well, we have to give it a container. We got to tell it where do we want to look. For our purposes, we'll just click the little star. We're going to click Browse. We're just going to look in the root of the domain. We're interested in basically saying, let's just find everything that we can find from a system perspective and bring it into Configuration Manager. In a larger organization, this may not be preferable. You may want to say, I only want to find a subset of computers. Now, if those computers are in different organizational units, when you click Browse, you would just browse to the OU that you're looking for and select it. Right now, we're going to use the computer account of the site server. The site server has all the rights that are necessary. It does have read permission of the domain. And click OK. Let's discover what's up here. We have a polling schedule. Full discovery occurs every 7 days. That's fine. We can say we want to run a full discovery every once in a while, preferably on a weekend or something like that, but we can do a full discovery to make sure that we found everything that we need. If we click Schedule, that tells us what day and time this is going to start. Basically, it's going to recur every 7 days from today, or whenever we decide to choose. We can do it at midnight, for example. And we also notice here we have enabled Delta Discovery. Remember, Delta Discovery is going to find resources that are new or modified since the last discovery cycle. And every 5 minutes, Delta Discovery is going to go take a look and say, hey, is there anything new out there? That's a good thing. You can also choose to remove or add different Active Directory attributes for objects that are discovered by virtue of being a system in Active Directory. So here are the Active Directory attributes that are discovered by default at the top of the page. And I mentioned these earlier on. Well, you're going to see the object GUI ID, which is the globally unique ID in Active Directory, its name, and a number of other pieces of information. Well, you may want to find some other pieces of information. For example, suppose you have computers that came from different countries or that are in different departments. Every attribute that you bring in is going to add a little bit more work to Configuration Manager, but at the same time, it's another piece of information that you can use in your queries to be able to streamline and make a little bit more granular the administrative process. We're going to leave the defaults in place for now. Now, one thing that you'll find with system discovery is you may end up with a mass of computers that you don't even use anymore. A lot of organizations do a really poor job removing old computer accounts from Active Directory. So they'll get 100 computers in each year, but they won't remove the old computer accounts from Active Directory. Well, you could use this option to help with that issue just a little bit. Only discover computers that have logged onto a domain in the last, say, 90 days. This way, if a computer's been off for more than 90 days, it's not going to be brought into the Configuration Manager database. Or do you want to discover computers that have only had their computer password, their computer account password updated in the last period of time? For now, we're not that interested in these options. Everything in Global Mantics is new, so we're going to take the defaults and click OK. And again, we do want to run a full discovery as soon as possible so we can start seeing some systems being brought in to the environment. So, how do we know the systems are being discovered? Well, systems are assets. So let's go to Assets and Compliance. Everything has to be a part of a collection. And so we're going to start taking a look at the All Systems collection in Devices. And as you can see, we now have a whole bunch of systems in this device collection that we didn't have before. This is a good thing. Right now, there's not much in the way of activity because these are brand new records. But you can see that systems have indeed been added to the collection, although they don't have any client yet. That's why it says none, and that's why it says no. But they have been added to the site GM1, and that's because they're a part of the Active Directory site boundary and boundary group. One of the things I would like to point out is if you open up the properties for one of these items, you can see that the agent that actually found it is the SMSAD System Discovery Agent. You can also find what time it was discovered. So by opening up a particular resource from a collection, you can actually see exactly how that item was discovered, why it was included in the Configuration Manager database. So if there's an item that looks funny for whatever reason, all you've got to do is look here to figure out why it got discovered and added to the Configuration Manager database. I also promised you that I'd show you where the log files are. So I'm going to open up Windows Explorer. I'm going to go to Computer, C Drive, Program Files, Microsoft Configuration Manager, Logs. Notice there's AD-sysdis right there. That's the Active Directory System Discovery log file. If I double click it, you can open it, and you can see that there's a lot of gibberish here that will help you determine if there's issues happening with the discovery process. You can see DDR, which stands for Discovery Data Record, for a number of these items has been discovered and then written into the database. With older versions of Configuration Manager, there was a separate tool called trace32.exe that you could download in order to read the log files that are produced by Configuration Manager. With Trace32, you get better syntax with the log files. You're able to see things easier because it formats it nicely for you. That tool has been updated in Configuration Manager 2012, and it's now called CM Trace. And it's actually available in the SMS Setup /tools folder right on the Configuration Manager 2012 source media. So you don't have to download it separately. It ships with Configuration Manager, and it makes your life much easier with regard to log file management. We next up have another Active Directory discovery method called Active Directory Group Discovery. This discovery method will find Active Directory groups and group membership in your Active Directory environment. But it returns relatively limited data. It's actually recommended that you run this discovery method after other discovery methods. For example, run system and user discovery first, and then limit the discovery to groups that are used with the Configuration Manager. So only find the groups you actually need using this discovery method, and use system and user discovery more often when it makes sense. Use this one last. Again, we have a log file, and there's also going to be settings to review. We won't be using this discovery method right now in this course, but we'll go over and take a look at the discovery settings for this particular discovery process. So once again, we're going to go to Administration, and we're going to go to Discovery Methods. We're not going to actually enable the group discovery right now, but if we did, you can see that there's not a whole lot to worry about. Again, we're going to be simply enabling Active Directory Group Discovery and then choosing the scope. Now, I will show you what that means by scope. We can add groups, or we can add locations. If we decide to add groups, it's going to ask us for specific names of groups we want to discover in Active Directory. If, however, we choose to add by location, we're going to provide an LDAP naming context for Active Directory. So we can start at the root of the domain and start searching child containers, the whole 9 yards, if you like. So when you're looking for groups, there's a lot of different ways you can find these groups. Just make sure you understand the difference. If you choose the group method, you're going to find specific groups. If you choose the location method, you'll find all the groups in a specific location. Again, we have a polling schedule, and this discovery method does allow delta discovery. And we have options again. Only discover computers that have logged on to a domain in the last 90 days. And if you want, this is a critical piece to understand for this particular discovery option, you can discover the membership of distribution groups. So if you have a distribution group, think Exchange here, you can discover the membership of that distribution group if you like. Next up, we have Active Directory User Discovery, and this will discover user objects from Active Directory, as you probably guessed by its name. You can use this user information in queries and as parts of collections. There's log files associated, a log file associated with the discovery method as well, and also settings to review. There's really not much here to talk about with user discovery. We're going to go over to the Configuration Manager console for Global Mantics and take a look at the settings for this particular discovery method, although we will not be using it actively quite yet. Once again, we're in the Discovery Methods area, and we are here at User Discovery. I'll open up the Properties page, and again, you're going to see Enable Active Directory Discovery, User Discovery, and as we saw before with System Discovery, we have to provide an LDAP path, at which point we'll begin to identify users that are found in Active Directory. You can recursively search Active Directory child containers, which if you have multiple levels of organizational units makes sense. And you can discover objects within Active Directory groups, of which we discussed before. But you got to start with the top level container that you're going to use for user discovery. Something else I want to show you here again is the fact you can include additional Active Directory attributes if you like. But did you know that not everything exists in Active Directory? Yes. Even in the most heavily Microsoft-oriented environments, not everything belongs in Active Directory. You may have systems that sit completely outside the Active Directory maintenance space. In fact, sometimes Microsoft recommends you have systems that are not part of a domain or part of Active Directory. So how do you find these resources? Well, that's where network discovery comes into play. This goes right out to the network to find new objects, including computers, printers, and other network devices. So, whereas the discovery methods we've discussed so far will just query the Active Directory database, this one does some real work. It goes out to the network and interrogates it and says, give me everything you got. That also means it's pretty noisy and resource intensive, as evidenced by the word interrogate. So it's going to go out there and it's going to basically scream out loud, tell me what you got, and it's going to expect responses. So it's noisy and resource intensive. By many, it's considered a discovery of last resort. If no other discovery method works, use network discovery because you'll be able to find it. But this is the one way you can find objects that are not available in Active Directory. It also has a log file, netdisk.log, and lots of settings to go along with it. Right now, we're not that interested in network discovery. We may look at it later on, but for now, everything we need is in Active Directory. So we're not going to be configuring network discovery. There are 3 levels of network discovery that can take place. And these range in order from least to most impactful. So if you're out there looking at the network and you're just saying, give me the network topology, well, that's not super impactful. However, as you say, okay, give me the network topology and tell me about the clients that are out there, well, it's a bit more work. It's got to go out there and it's got to query each individual client, get some information about it, and then return it to the configuration manager system. Well, you can also go so far as to say, and by the way, while you're at it, tell those darn clients to give me their OS. I want to know what they're running. Well, that adds another layer of impact, another level of impact to the entire discovery process. So bear in mind that when you're running a network discovery, there's different discovery levels, and each one will require different levels of resources to be applied in order to get the information that you're looking for. Network discovery can be run in both primary and secondary sites. And as you may have guessed, there's always settings to review for a discovery method. And here's network discovery. I'm going to right-click this one, and you're going to see there's quite a bit more here than we've seen in the other discovery methods. If I enable network discovery, you're going to see we have the type of discovery, which I talked about just a couple minutes ago. Topology, to topology and client, to topology client and operating system. Remember, each one of these successive levels requires more resources and is more impactful on the configuration manager system. And the more information you gather, the more information that's written into the System Center Configuration Manager database. If you have a slow network, you can tell Configuration Manager that you have a slow network. So this will adjust metrics so that the Configuration Manager doesn't constantly time out, for example, and create errors when there really are none. In order to reduce the impact of network discovery, you can say, just search for particular subnets. So you can add the subnets here if you like by providing the subnet and a mask. You can add many subnets, as many as you like. Or, I just want to search specific domains to discover resources. So, what domain do I want to search? If I'm looking for SNMP devices, I need to have an SNMP community name for my environment. By default, SNMP uses a community name of public, and that's built into Configuration Manager. If you use a unique or a different community name in your own environment, you can add that here. You can also tell Configuration Manager to go to a specific device in an attempt to discover resources. Or, if you're using a DHCP server, you can tell it to find just clients that are using that DHCP server. This DHCP server has to be running a Microsoft DHCP instance. And as is the case with the other discovery methods, you can choose to run network discovery on a schedule. For our purposes here, right now, we don't need to run network discovery, so we're not going to enable any network discovery properties. And now for the one discovery method that is enabled by default, but doesn't actually find any new resources whatsoever. No, Heartbeat Discovery finds nothing. Its entire purpose in life is to be initiated by a client to report back to the Configuration Manager system that a client is still alive. This is the one discovery method that's actually client initiated, not server initiated. So this discovery method is enabled by default only basically as a keep alive for particular clients so that the configuration manager system knows whether or not particular clients are still out on the network. And we'll take a look at the settings for heartbeat discovery. And finally, let's look at heartbeat discovery and its properties. There isn't much. Basically, heartbeat once a week gets returned to the configuration manager server to say, hey, I'm here. You can do that more often if you like, 1 hour, 1 day, what have you. Or 2 hours, 2 weeks, 2 days, the whole 9 yards is available to you. We started this lesson by learning about some new things that can be found in Configuration Manager 2012 regarding discovery. You then learned the discovery facts of life and learned about how discovery works in a Configuration Manager environment. From there, we discussed the 4 Active Directory discovery methods: System, Forest, Group, and User. As a part of that process, you also configured boundaries and a boundary group for the initial clients that are going to be used by Configuration Manager in this course. We also discovered a number of resources, clients that can be used, that we'll be managing in this course. So, beyond just discovering discovery, we actually started preparing our Configuration Manager environment for the real world. We then wrapped up with a brief discussion on network discovery and heartbeat discovery. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.